people can judge us on what we do.
And people are judging. Quebec is under fire over its failure to pass legislation in honor of Joyce Echaquan.
DFO continues to dictate and impose their rule on the fisheries.
And the fight over a moderate livelihood fishery and treaty rights continue as the government implements new regulations. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin tonight in Alberta, where an ad for a coffee company has been sparking outrage for its racist name, slogans, and logo. And the owner of the business also claims to be running for Calgary mayor. Tamara Pimentel reports.
"Forget gas, huff this" is the slogan for this coffee blend called Wasted Native. This ad has been circulating around on social media, and it's causing concern as this new coffee business by Kevin J. Johnston launches its website. But what's unsettling for these commenters is not only the racist logo, but Johnston claims he is running for mayor in Calgary.
It is concerning. This is the reason we need diversity and Native voices sitting at the table.
Marilyn North Pagan is the first Blackfoot woman to run for city councillor in Calgary. She told APTN she wasn't surprised when she saw the ad, but needed to speak out.
Being a leader, we have to start acknowledging it, because if we are silent about it, we're just as guilty for creating the violence. When I did look at that, that's the first thing that came to mind is stereotype of the images that actually don't exist but are making fun out of Native people. It's just another version of the mascots that we're trying to get rid of in these sports teams, and people don't understand why we want to get rid of them.
On the website, Johnston claims that Wasted Native was a hit with real Native Indians in northern Alberta, and that they all wanted the Indian face, name, and joke on the packaging. It isn't clear who he consulted with, and the company didn't reply to our request for an interview, but this isn't the first time Johnston has been called out for racist remarks.
Well, Kevin J. Johnston here.
In 2019, the Ontario Superior Court ordered Johnston to pay $2.5 million in damages for hateful Islamophobic comments in Mississauga, Ontario. North Pagan says these are the reasons why Calgary needs Indigenous representation in the city, to diminish acts such as this.
Right. I know they generate trauma. I know they generate all the negative feelings that, especially someone like me who's a federal day school person. We just have to look at the positive aspects and know that not everybody in the society is like that.
The coffee can be bought online, and despite the feedback, there has been no sign of changing the name or removing the coffee blend from the website. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
To Quebec now, where physicians, academics, and social workers are blasting the provincial government for a failure to recognize Joyce's principle. Joyce's principle was drafted by the Atikamekw Nation to address racism in the healthcare system. It's named after Joyce Echaquan, who last fall live-streamed the racist behavior of healthcare staff prior to her death. Tom Fenario has the details.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, bonjour tout le monde.
Yann Lafreniere insists that his government is working to fight racism.
Since November, we've been announcing different measures, and people can judge us on what we do.
The Indigenous Affairs Minister for Quebec recently announced the creation of several new positions to address racism towards Indigenous people in healthcare. The public health authority that oversees the hospital where Joyce Echaquan died is now hiring 2 liaison officers, a complaints commissioner, and has created an Indigenous relations role. All the hires will come from Echaquan's community of Manawan.
There is racism in Quebec. There are people that are racist, and that's the reason why we put in place measures to stop that.
While the Quebec government recognizes that racism exists, they say systemic racism does not. As a result, they are not adopting Joyce's principle. Created by the Atikamekw Nation, Joyce's principle calls for Quebec to recognize systemic racism. The fact that the province refuses to take on a First Nations-led endeavor to combat racism is drawing fire.
It's unfortunate it's still going on and people's lives are at stake.
Darlene Kitty is a Cree family physician in Chisasibi First Nation, near the James Bay. She points to the findings of Quebec's own Vien Commission, a 2-year inquiry into Indigenous people's relationship with public services, as proof that systemic racism plagues the healthcare system.
Still, the current government does not accept that there's systemic racism, but we know there is. We know for sure. It's been happening for decades.
She's not the only one demanding the province recognize systemic racism. An open letter is blasting Quebec Premier François Legault for failing to adopt Joyce's principle. The letter, penned by Samir Shaheen Hussein, a Montreal pediatrician, calls the government's refusal harmful because systemic racism causes unnecessary suffering and, in extreme cases, quite literally, kills people. For his part, Lafrenière says he was happy to read the letter.
You see that people are quite interested in the matter. We agree to disagree on the definition of systemic racism, and we don't want to fight on words. We want to fight on racism.
We've had intentions. We've had these things be said to us. We're patiently waiting for decades, for centuries, for at this point, for our rights. At one point, you tend to ask is, what exactly are we supposed to do in order for us to get this basic need?
Alicia Tokiapik was the first Inuk woman to run in a provincial election in 2018. The Nunavut community worker says it's baffling that the province is continuing to deny the existence of systemic racism.
The systemic racism that he denies shouldn't have gone this far to be dragging on where it's quite obvious it is existing, especially with Indigenous people.
Meanwhile, the investigation into the circumstances surrounding Echaquan's death continues. Quebec's coroner has announced public hearings to begin in mid-May. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
We'd like to hear what you think about the Quebec government's failure to pass Joyce's principle. Here's how you can continue that conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on our website. That's at aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Earlier this year, a woman in Saskatchewan died soon after being released from a correctional center. Now, advocates for female inmates say better reintegration practices need to be in place to help women when they're released from jail. APTN's Priscilla Wolf has that story.
Kimberly Squirrel was released from the Pine Grove Provincial Jail for Women in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan on January 20th. Her frozen body was found 3 days later near a street corner in Saskatoon. At the time, the temperature was -33, -45 with the wind chill. Squirrel had 6 kids. She also had addictions and mental health issues. Shirley Isbister says a better release plan might have saved her life. Isbister is president of the Central Urban Métis Federation in Saskatoon. Her group helps homeless people with warm-up stations, warm clothing, food, or sanitizers.
It's a challenge that we face. I mean, no matter what time of the year, you know, there needs to be a point of you can't just drop somebody off at to take a bus or have transportation back to Saskatoon. There needs to be a family connection, because when you come out, you need that connection to be able to start your life again.
Criminal defense lawyer and advocate Alida Oberholzer says female inmates don't have the aftercare or reintegration programs they need.
Unless you're a sentenced individual, unless you pled guilty to the charges, there are very limited resources available, especially to female clients, for reintegrating back into society, especially shelter.
Oberholzer says it doesn't end there. Inmates who are not sentenced yet or plead guilty also don't have access to reintegration planning.
We have focused a lot of our efforts on reintegrating individuals who have admitted or pled guilty to crimes, but those that are presumed innocent should have those same resources available to them.
Noel Boussy speaks for Saskatchewan's Ministry of Justice. A statement he sent to APTN reads in part, "For privacy reasons, the ministry is unable to speak to the specifics of an inmate's release. Corrections may provide transportation for offenders or individuals back to their home community upon release from any court point or correctional facility in the province of Saskatchewan. The first responsibility to obtain transportation lies with the offender. Once all personal effects have been exhausted, the offender can seek assistance from corrections. This policy has been in place for a number of years. Lucy said that squirrel was escorted to a bus leaving Prince Albert for Saskatoon after her release. The ministry says an internal review is presently being done. Priscilla Wolfe, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
To another tragedy now, this one on the West Coast. A small community in BC is mourning the death of an 11-year-old boy. The boy was found in critical condition by the RCMP last Friday afternoon after they were called to his home in the community of Scowlitz. The boy was rushed to hospital where he later died from his injuries. A homicide team is investigating the death and they are awaiting the results of the autopsy. Members of the community who did not want to appear on camera say they are devastated by the loss. Time to step aside for a quick break now, but coming up, we'll speak with the Minister of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans about the Fed's plan for a moderate livelihood fishery. Stick around. Welcome back. As Mi'kmaq communities prepare for the fishing season, the federal government's moderate livelihood fishery plan is being met with criticism from leaders, including the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq chiefs, who say they were not consulted. The Mi'kmaq must fish within the commercial fishing season. That's according to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Moderate Livelihood Fishery Plan. But the Mi'kmaq want to fish in their own season. Last fall, Sabaganagadie First Nation launched their fishery, which was met with violence from non-Indigenous fishers who say the stocks are at risk. The Supreme Court of Canada upheld treaty rights in 1999, ruling that the Mi'kmaq have the right to manage their own moderate livelihood.
DFO continues to dictate and impose their rule on fisheries that is outside of their scope and mandate. The right to a livelihood fisheries is not and should not be driven by industry or the federal government. It must come from the Mi'kmaq Nova Scotia. Imposing restrictions independently without input from our people on how we implement our right must stop.
The federal government says their new proposal for the First Nations moderate livelihood fishery regulations will be tailored for each community. But as we just heard, there's a catch. All communities must fish during the commercial season. Fisheries Minister Bernadette Jordan joins us now to discuss. Minister Jordan, thanks for being with us. The new moderate livelihood plan will regulate the number of traps, the region fished, and the stock, all negotiable with each community's needs, but all communities must fish during the commercial fishery season. So how is this different from a commercial fishery license?
Oh, this is extremely different from a commercial fishery license. What we're doing is working with communities to make sure they're able to fish a moderate livelihood. And I have to say that, you know, with any fishery, there's a lot more to it than a season that it's fished in. So, for example, with the moderate livelihood authorization, communities, First Nations communities can determine who's fishing the licenses. They can determine the amount of boats that are going out. They will be able to sell their catch. Currently, because it's not an authorized fishery, they are not able to do that. And this is going to make it possible for them to be able to sell their catch. That's something that we heard very loud and clear from First Nations, that they were frustrated because, you know, they would fish for a moderate livelihood, but because it wasn't an authorized fishery, they weren't able to sell it. So we're going to make that possible by moving forward with a plan for communities. It's a very flexible plan that they can adapt to their own circumstances in their own communities.
Despite what you've outlined there, the Nova Scotia Chiefs have rejected this plan and say fishing in commercial fishing season does not respect treaty rights. What's your reaction?
Well, I will say that what we're putting forward is an ability for First Nations to be able to fish this year. We want to make sure they're able to get out and exercise the moderate livelihood right this year. So that's one of the reasons why we are moving on this. Of course, you know, with regards to seasons, we are very concerned about conservation of species. We need to make sure that it's sustainable for the long term, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, we've said that within a season has to be when the moderate livelihood is fished. But the thing is that this is going to give First Nations the ability to go out this year. And that is something that's really important, because we want to make sure that we don't have a repeat of last year. We want to make sure that they're able to get on the water and exercise their moderate livelihood right and take advantage of a very lucrative fishery.
Well, Mi'kmaq Senator Dan Christmas says his and other parliamentarians' recommendations have fallen on deaf ears, and that he believes the government's on the wrong path for the moderate livelihood fishery, and that the conservation concerns just mentioned there are false. What's your response to that?
Well, I will say that, you know, I mean, when we had one or two bands who were interested in a moderate livelihood fishery, the conservation would have been a different thought. But when we have 35 who are interested in going out, we have to recognize the scalability of the fishery. We have to look at when people are fishing, and oftentimes what we've found is that it's at a time when lobster particularly are maybe molting, or they're growing, and they need that time to kind of rest and replenish the stock. You know, I mean, as the minister and even as First Nations, everybody wants to make sure that the stock is healthy for the long term. And, you know, I mean, that's why seasons exist, is to make sure that we're able to conserve a species and make sure that we're able to fish it for centuries and for generations to come.
Minister, APTN has uncovered government documents that the DFO suspected non-Indigenous fishermen were going to react in violence to the moderate livelihood fishery when it was launched last fall. As DFO Minister, how do you explain the lack of preparation for the violence that occurred?
You know, last year was a very difficult year. There's no question. We want to make sure that what my priority was last year was de-escalation and keeping people calm. And I will say there were over 20 charges laid last year in the incidents that had happened. This year, we're making sure that everyone stays safe as they go out on the water. We will have an increased CNP presence. We'll have an increased Coast Guard presence, and we'll have a RCMP as well, because, you know, everyone should be able to go to work safely. It doesn't matter who you are. And we want to make sure that people stay safe as they're able to go out and fish side by side this year.
Minister, we'll have to leave it there. Sure appreciate you taking some time for us here today, though.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
You can find much more on this story over on our website, aptnnews.ca. Time for another quick break, but before we go, look at a story we're working on in British Columbia, where the widow of a man who died when his tugboat sank is trying to find out what happened.
I'm Lee Wilson. I'm working on a story in northern BC about a wife seeking support to find answers about her husband's tragic incident at sea. Last month, a tugboat sank on the Gardner Canal, claiming 2 lives and leaving 1 survivor. Judy Carlick-Pearson believes the tugboat's recovery can provide answers into what happened to her husband and crew. This story coming soon on APTN News.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And our photo today features Leighton Anna Gideon from Jessica Peekjiak First Nation. Here she is spending time dancing for others in their healing journey at a treatment center. Keep those photos coming. The response has been overwhelming as of late, and we want to thank all of our viewers for their contributions. You too can send your photo to share@aptn.ca for your chance to be our next photo of the day. Time now to take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, +3 for Halifax, 0 with snow in St. John's. -3 and snow in Nain, 1 below in Happy Valley Goose Bay. -6 for Montreal, 17 below with snow for Chibougamau. -5 under sunny skies in Sault Ste. Marie, 7 below for Ottawa. +2 and sunny in Thunder Bay, 1 above in Sioux Lookout. -13 with snow for Churchill, 3 below and sunny in God's Lake. +3 for Winnipeg and Brandon, 0 in Barons River. +6 in Regina, +2 for Saskatoon. -5 in Uranium City, 0 in La Ronge. Over in northern Alberta, +4 for Fort McMurray and Grand Prairie. 10 above in Calgary, 15 in Medicine Hat. +10 with showers for Vancouver and Campbell River. +6 and rain in Prince George, 1 above with snow for Dease Lake. -24 in Old Crow, -2 with snow for Whitehorse. 4 below with flurries in Yellowknife, -14 in Norman Wells. -24 with snow for Sax Harbor, 18 below in Inuvik. -26 in Baker Lake and Chesterfield. 31 below for Resolute, -35 in Joe Haven. Nation to Nation is coming up in a matter of minutes, and that means host Todd Lamarand is standing by in Ottawa with a preview.
Tonight on Nation to Nation, I speak to Sylvia Maracle. She's the Executive Director of the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres, and they're behind a new report. It says renewed cultural traditions are the only way to stop gender-based violence. As well, an Anishinaabe mother of 2 criticized her community's child welfare program. Now, Chief and Council want to muzzle her, or else she could face banishment. I asked her lawyer about all this. And an Anishinaabe pianist is getting her compositions played in a unique place later this month. The Peace Tower Bells on Parliament Hill. It's all coming up shortly. I'll see you then.
Good looking show coming up. Well, this week on APTN Investigates, Rob Smith looks back at 50 years of Indigenous resistance to see what led us down the barrel. Here's a preview.
Don't point your gun at me! Please! I need to hear that. Don't point, he's pointing his gun at me!
February 7th, 2020. The man you hear is Denzel Sutherland Wilson at the Giddendam checkpoint located on Wet'suwet'en land.
Take your gun off of me!
The people activists call settlers would call this kind of thing a blockade. Wet'suwet'en call it a defense against an invasion. The police see it as a criminal act and move in.
You have a choice today. You can be complicit in the destruction of the future for your own children, or you can do what's right.
20 kilometers up the road, the police raid the Unistoten camp. In total, 28 people are arrested.
We need some of the earth to be left alone. They don't have to take everything. And that's what we're doing. Our rights, our title, our jurisdiction, our authority, we constantly remind whether it's provincial or federal governments that they only have assumed and presumed authority. The authority lies with the Wet'suwet'en.
And you can bet that's going to be a good one coming up tomorrow night after the news. A heartwarming interaction now between a beluga whale and a young aquarium visitor.
Give him a kiss, Chase.
Pretty cute. That was the scene in Mystic, Connecticut. The whale can't see the little boy's mouth, but still mimics him and appears to blow a kiss back. And that's a fine place to leave things for tonight. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and never miss a story by downloading the APTN News app. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Stick around. Todd is next with Nation to Nation. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.